a U.S. ally who had just won a highly suspect election to succeed his father, a former Soviet strongman. Much the same is true in Turkmenistan, which Human Rights Watch describes as one of the most repressive countries in the world. In a region of bases, energy and big power rivalries, ideals require patience, the New York Times explains. Therefore, Washington has to temper its passion for democracy and human rights. There are good reasons for the imperial powers and their acolytes to insist that we should forget about the past and move forward. The familiar refrain of change of course that is invoked every few years. But those who prefer to understand the world, the victims included, will recognize that history teaches many important lessons. All of this matters, two scholars write in Foreign Affairs, because national historical memory, or amnesia, can have concrete political consequences. How states and societies engage their pasts affects how they develop. We understand that very well, and rightly find it deeply disturbing when the charge of amnesia is directed against antagonists, as in this case. They are discussing how national historical memory in Russia has failed to come to terms with Bolshevik crimes. Deep concern has also been expressed repeatedly about Japan's limited recognition of its past atrocities, among other cases selected according to the same very clear criterion. Preserving historical memory, unsullied by apologetics, is no less important for the permanent victors, who can be called to account only by their own citizens. That is particularly true when the institutional roots of past practices persist. Those who want to understand today's world will take note of Britain's actions from the days when it created modern Iraq for its own convenience, ensuring Iraq's dependency. And they will not overlook Britain's practices until the regime it imposed and supported was overthrown in 1958. Nor will they overlook the conclusion of the Foreign Office in July of that year, that in British-dominated Iraq, wealth and power have remained concentrated in the hands of a few rich landowners and tribal sheikhs, centered around the court in a brutally repressive society. The overthrow of the British-backed Iraqi regime by Abdul Karim Qasim in 1958 was the first break in the Anglo-American condominium over the world's major energy resources. The United States and United Kingdom reacted at once, both with military action in Lebanon and Jordan, and with secret joint plans to resort to violence if necessary, to ensure that the virus of independent nationalism did not infect others, ruthlessly to intervene, in their words, whatever the source of the threat to dominance. This planning was highly relevant in the 1991 war. Concerns over the Qasim regime were enhanced by the evaluations of close imperial observers. An official of the British corporation that controlled Iraq's oil informed the Foreign Office that Qasim's goals went well beyond political independence, dignity, and unity in brotherly cooperation with other Arabs. He also wanted to increase and distribute the national wealth, to found a new society and a new democracy, and to use this strong democratic Arabist Iraq as an instrument to free and elevate other Arabs and Afro-Asians, and to assist the destruction of imperialism, by which he largely meant British influence in the underdeveloped countries. As if that were not ominous enough, there was concern that Qasim might adopt Gamal Abdel Nasser's plans to use Saudi petrodollars to improve the living standards of poor Arabs everywhere. One Nasser was bad enough, an expansionist dictator somewhat of the Hitler type, Secretary of State Dulles railed, a power-hungry monster whose philosophy of the revolution was barely distinguishable from Mein Kampf. He was capturing Arab loyalty and enthusiasm throughout the region, President Eisenhower observed with dismay, warning that he was trying to get control of Middle East oil, to get the income and the power to destroy the Western world. Eisenhower assured Congress that the coup in Iraq and disturbances in Lebanon and Jordan were being fomented by Nasser under Kremlin guidance. Intelligence reported that popular feeling in the Arab world, even in such states as Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, is generally favorable to the Iraqi coup and hostile to U.S. and U.K. intervention. So there is a strong possibility that the revolutionary infection will spread even to the U.S.-backed tyrannies that controlled the world's main oil resources, possibly even to Libya, another important oil producer, then firmly under a U.S.-backed dictator. Washington toyed with the idea that Qasim might be a counter to communism, but it is unlikely that any such thoughts survived his 1961 decision that took away over 99.5% of the concession area of the multinational that controlled Iraq's oil, including both proven reserves and possible fields that were still unexplored but assumed to be huge. The virus was evidently dangerous and had to be destroyed, and it was, in 1963. According to former National Security Council staffer Roger Morris, confirmed by other sources, the Central Intelligence Agency, under President John F. Kennedy, conducted its own regime change in Baghdad, carried out in collaboration with Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party. It was almost certainly a gain for our side. National Security Council aide Robert Comer informed Kennedy the day of the takeover. The usual hideous atrocities followed, including a slaughter of suspected communists and other leftists, using lists provided by the CIA, much as in Guatemala in 1954 and in Indonesia 2 years after the overthrow of Qasim. The Baathists systematically murdered untold numbers of Iraq's educated elite, Morris continues, including hundreds of doctors, teachers, technicians, lawyers, and other professionals, as well as military and political figures. There followed further crimes that we need not recount, with ample support when considered useful by London, Washington, and other willing participants. Reviewing the story on the eve of the U.S. and U.K. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Morris commented perceptively, "If a new war in Iraq seems fraught with danger and uncertainty, just wait for the peace." There appear to have been many such warnings from knowledgeable analysts, disregarded by Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and associates. It is notable that fear of Iraqi democracy persisted without change, even when Saddam became an enemy in 1990. In the following months, and through the war, the democratic opposition within Iraq was not only barred from Washington, but by the media as well. Suppose, however, that we adopt the convention of dispatching the inconvenient past to the memory hole, and dismissing its rather clear lessons as old-fashioned irrelevancy, adopting the comforting posture of historical amnesia that we deplore among enemies. Let us then assume that a miraculous conversion has taken place in Washington and London, as often proclaimed before, but this time in reality. The United States will promote, or at least tolerate, a moderately independent and sovereign Iraq, departing from its consistent record there and elsewhere. A rational observer might nevertheless conclude that the declarations of the foreign minister of Iran are more credible than those emanating from Washington and London. Iran could live with a more or less democratic and sovereign Iraq. It is hard to imagine how Washington and London could do so. Consider the policies that Iraq would be likely to adopt. Iraqis may have no love for Iran, but they would prefer friendly relations with their powerful neighbor to antagonism and conflict, and would be likely to join in the efforts to integrate Iran into the region, which were underway long before the U.S. and U.K. invasion. Furthermore, the Shiite religious and political leadership in Iraq has very close links with Iran. Shiite success in Iraq is already invigorating the pressures for freedom and democracy among the bitterly oppressed Shiite population of Saudi Arabia just across the border, tendencies that would only increase if Iraq were to be granted a measure of sovereignty. The efforts of the Saudi Shiites